Start recording. Fantastic. Okay, welcome everyone. My name is Gcobani, and I'm going to be doing the moderation for this launch for the Alkalinity of Bottled Water by Makhosazana Xaba at UJ. And I just wanted to open with a poem from the book that I think summates why I wanted to do this launch for this particular collection. And this poem is on page 59, if you have the book in front of you, and it's called Opening Up Like That. It is risky to open up like that. What if something comes, lodges inside the base of your petals, and irritates you? It is dangerous to open up like that. What if something heavy lands on the tips of your petal and breaks you off? It is admirable to open up like that. When something finally arrives, to touch sides with your gentle petals, it will be one with you. It is delightful to open up like that. Every eye that catches the vibrant colors of your petal instantly grabs the depth of your beauty. And when I read this poem, I thought about anthropology and our work in always harnessing vulnerability. Because in anthropology, we are always asked in many ways, not us ourselves, but we are always asking in some ways people to take us into the most vulnerable and intimate parts of their lives. I started to think about, in reading this poem, what does it mean then for us as anthropologists to really open ourselves and to open up like that? Because we've heard, of course, from Brene Brown that really the power of vulnerability is this ability of people to really share stories. But people don't just share stories, they share stories with people who've earned the right to hear them. And so when I was reading this collection, I thought about our task in anthropology, which is always around harnessing vulnerability and going into the most intimate parts. And so I think that question in some ways opens up, not just, of course, in terms of fiction, but also what we do as anthropologists, which is really always opening up like that, whether it's topics around sexual and reproductive health, sexual lives of men, genocides, and many, many of the tough topics that we often deal with. But today is not really about me. It's about this book, and we have two wonderful people, Mawethu Nkosana as well as Esihle Lupindo. I would like to send apologies from Thandeka Kati, who could not join us due to a family emergency that she's attending to at the moment. She's literally on the road home, which is why she hasn't been able to join us. So without wasting any time, I want to hand over to Kosi Makhosazana Xaba to share with us a little bit of the background behind the book. And then we're going to have readings from our selected readers in the course of the session. So over to you, Kosi.
Thank you very much, Gcobani. And I just want to repeat my big thank you for organizing this, for making it happen. I really, really appreciate it. And thank you to the people who are going to be in conversation with me. Baya danki, ngibonge kakhulu. So the background to this book is not as exciting because the truth is I was working on Our Words, Our Worlds, and I was working on another collection that is probably coming out in June that I will not say anything else about except that. And I was, sometimes you feel like your brain is fried. You think, oh my gosh, I'm thinking so hard. And then one day I woke up, I went and I sat hoping to work on the two projects, and I thought, give yourself a break, Makhosazana. Just look at all the other poems that are floating around in your computer and see how many there are. And I did that. And I put them together and I started counting. And then I started getting lost in them. And I thought, whoa, you have enough to submit. And then, of course, this was 2017, right? So I started working on them, started revising. I think I gave myself like 2 days to just return to the poems that I'd written and put away, to just read them again to myself, think, oh, this one works, should I revise it, and all of that. But I remember making the decision, you have enough poems for your third collection. When you're done with this, or maybe you must use this to take a break from these 2 projects that you're finding quite challenging at this point. And so that's what I did. And then I gave myself a deadline, and I revised the poems, put them together, submitted to a publisher who rejected them, but didn't tell me until I followed up about 6 months later. And so after that one rejection, I went to Botsotso, who was very happy to take them. So Alan ended up publishing the book. We started working together in 2018, and that's how it came out in 2019. So it's a book that came out of the frustration of me feeling like I'm working too hard and I need a break. So it was lovely to just find poems that were sitting there. Some of them I'd even forgotten I had written. So yeah, that's the background to the book. So it actually came out during the last weekend of April in 2019.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Kosi. Are you gonna read anything for us?
Yeah, I thought I could read. Yeah, I thought I could read 2 poems that kind of like speak to the moment. The one is The Alkalinity of Bottled Water, the poem that gave the book its title. And I'm going to start with that one. My subject on the comparisons of alkalinity levels of bottled water. In the distance, I hear the now familiar song, Solomoni yo, Solomon, peering through the buildings of Braamfontein, unaltered by the strong winds. From the window of our 7th office floor, we saw the shooting of a Catholic priest. The milli equivalent per liter, mval of water, commonly known as pH. Did these jacaranda trees ever imagine a sight like this in front of the Wits Great Hall? Many police vans, black men in uniform, stand with guns in their hands, facing a handful of students, singing and unarmed. This poem on the alkalinity of bottled water veers to the water we are sinking into. Parents have not forgotten the words of the Minister of Higher Education, the words he uttered and then laughed. Students must fall. I hear the sounds of struggle. Siya, 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 siya. These Wits students have not fallen, not now. The pH of this water must rise because that is how the body detoxifies. As the ire of students rises throughout the country, as universities burn, as the Minister of Finance prepares for his budget speech, as he receives charges from the NPA, the rand falls. Anxieties about relegation to junk status rise. The mval of water we have sunk into is falling, and we have forgotten that the CEO of the SABC returned to his job. The news of raging fires, of burning books, the end of the 7-year term of the first woman public protector this country has ever known is here. The report on state capture is looking for a safe place, has had to wait for the court judgment. As we waver in this water, as we discuss the dangers of this descent, We reach to our inner core for the power we once possessed, the power we once knew we had, in a time we once owned when the line was indelible. We now need an end to the welcome disruptions. We welcome the incoming public protector. While working on this poem, I take a call from a literary scholar who tells me, apologies, the poetry session has been cancelled. No visitors allowed at the University of Pretoria. During this period of flaring fires, rising students, and conversations about decolonizing, Shahira Kala, bullets on your back, Esihle Lupindo, 10 years later, we look back. This poem has settled with the analysis of alkalinity of bottled water we are drowning in. As our arms flail in desperation, we hope to start seeing a hard rock below, waiting at the unfathomable bottom. Esihle. The four sisters ensured that we never forget. Esihle. And for that, the pH rises, and we with it. As the rock becomes visible, we strengthen our arms and legs. Some pray, others sing. We dive with smiles on our faces because we realize that the turning point is close. We would be singing out loud if we're not underwater. So we focus on not drowning so that we can rise again, resurface, and realize the dreams of the democracy we want. I don't normally date my poems, but I felt the need to date this one. So it was written on the 20th of October, 2016. And I think I felt the need because of, I remember sitting there and thinking, there's so much happening. I need to remember when this was happening, you know? Yeah, so I thought I'd open with that one poem, and the second one is a very short one. It's on the next page, page 14, called The Sky Agrees. They understand our sorrows, imbibe our stories. They carry our memories and create their own. They articulate philosophies and choose fitting actions. They show us our shortcomings. Though they feel deceived, they stand up and speak out, demand and proclaim, occupy. They study while sitting, tweet, post, broadcast the revolution. They have changed the new we thought we had created. Even the sky agrees. The beautiful ones have arrived.
Sure. Thank you so much. Thank you for that. What a gift. What a gift. Okay, Mawethu, we will hand over to you. And can I ask, since I haven't done the clinical introductions in the traditional sense of reading a bio, that everyone, including Esihle, just begins by, you know, uzazisa, however you want to be introduced. So I've intentionally not done that to allow space for people to share. So over to you, Mawethu.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Mkhosi, for that reading. Both two poems or poems I wanted to read. So, okay, it started in a very interesting way. I love them. I really love them. The poems, I think they're beautiful. My name is Mawethu Nkosana. Professionally, I am the LGBTI advocacy lead at Civicus, which is an international organization that basically works around civic space. I am a creative working on a couple of projects, and I am a love worker. I organize what I call love workshops, and yeah, that's I think me in summary. The poems I'm going to be reading today, of course, from the Alkalinity of Bottled Water by Makhosazana Xaba. And I chose them randomly, really, because it was just like really about resonance. But I honestly do know that, choices always reflect deeper things, right? So it's not just about peaking. It's about deeper things, and I come into this session understanding that it wasn't just about peaking, there was a deeper thing. So the first poem I'll read is on page 31. It's called Speaking of Hearts. It is hard to drag a painful heart everywhere she goes. So she packs it in the drawer where she keeps her underwear. To comfort it with the warmth of intimacy, then she goes out with a friend. They watch a movie, have dinner. When her friend asks, "How was your heart?" she answers, "Resting awash with memories." So that's the first poem. Yeah, it speaks to so much, but it is also so transparent, and we started already this session kind of speaking about self-care and what that kind of looks like, and I think this poem is a practice of survival, right? That's what it offers us, right? The ways in which people resist and survive, and I really really liked it, and the second poem I will then read is on page 45, and it's called this. One, he was smiling. There was fire in the space between your frames. You were blazing too. Now that we know the texture of each other's fingernails, have seen the dirt, find a home, shall we call this by its name? And, again, so that's the second poem. I think it's a beautiful poem too, right? I particularly here like the style of writing and how it truly resonates with the ways in which I see words, right? And like kind of the tenacities I think words need to be treated in, and like how like short paragraphs could tell the most deepest of stories, and there's so much here, right? There's so much in this poem. And I think the more I've read it over and over again, the meaning kind of changes. And just I think for this moment, I will end with this poem and then give to Esihle and Mamukosi maybe to comment. The poem is on page 61. So I've literally been jumping. And yeah. This one is called This Pain. Opening up to this pain might kill me. Closing up against it has nearly killed me. Somewhere deep inside a knot sits. On some days, it feels like it is getting bigger. On others, it feels as if it is splintering. Today, I want to slit my gut and look. And yeah, those are my 3 poems for this round, Doc. I am open to any questions if there's any. And to just thank Makhosazana again so much for offering words so deliciously.
So fantastic. It's so interesting that you chose this pain, because I was torn between this pain and my opening poem that I read, but ultimately I went with "It is difficult to open up like this." But this was the second alternative, so it's very interesting that it's also one of your choices. Absolutely, and we'll certainly come back to you, Mawethu, for more readings. Esihle, over to you.
Thank you, Doc. So the interesting here is my opening poem is This Pain. That's the one I chose. So now I'm like, what's going on?
There's clearly this pain we are all dealing with.
So I am also going to read it because I had chosen it. My name is Esihle Lupindo. I am a writer and a sociologist. I currently work within the Help NPC space at the moment. And I'm really excited to be here because I've not been in a poetry space in so long, since we had like this lockdown. There have been no poetry spaces for us lovers of poetry. So I'm thankful for this space and for this collection, Mamkosi, thank you. So I will also start with this pain, as I have mentioned, which is on page 61, if you've got your book. This pain. Opening up to this pain might kill me. Closing up against it has nearly killed me. Somewhere deep inside a knot sits. On some days it feels like it is getting bigger. On others, it feels like it is splintering. Today, I want to slit my gut and look. So I choose this pain, I mean, not this pain, wow, this poem titled This Pain. I just think the theme of pain is something that a lot of us feel. And sometimes not some things that directly affect us. It's just things that happen in the world that we just happen to feel. And sometimes it's not, there's no wound you can just go and get something at the pharmacy for. You really want to just slit something in your body just to locate the pain. And that's why I chose this poem. I'm going to move to my second one. So the second poem I chose is on page 57. It's titled This Beret. When I wear my black beret, I often get comments, expressed in tone I meant to read as compliments. Oh, you look like a real poet in that beret. You could be walking in the streets of Paris looking like that. That beret gives you an air of sophistication. That 50s look works very well on you. I always smile and say thank you. But what I really want to say is, I wear this black beret when I miss my dead mother. And I choose this poem because how our worldviews affect what we see and how we interpret those things. And very often, we always think of memory as something abstract. It's in our brains, but we never think of things like clothing as a contribution to memory, as a way of archiving our memories of the people that have departed, and how Black women and Black people in general are always seen as political or as something to be embraced just because they're wearing like a black beret. And if you walk into a room that's full of white people and you're wearing that black beret, the mood almost tenses up because they're expecting something of you. And sometimes all it is just a matter of memory. And that's why I chose the second one. I'm going to read my last one for this round. So I chose this one because I'm really a lover of South African music. So it just jumped at me and I said, yes, let's do this. But also I remember, not that I remember, but based on what I've read, not my lived experiences, of how people who've lived through apartheid speak of how music traveled across borders and continents. And it really traveled faster than many modes of art. And this poem is on page 43. It's titled Not Yet Uhuru. The hazy silhouette soon publicly expressed. The mind recalls and lists the insults publicly hurled. The sudden release of a lover's hand publicly held. The body anticipates the onslaught publicly executed. The inaudible scream, the paralysis, the letter song, Not Yet Uhuru. I will read the rest of my poems in the second round. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I actually wanted to tweet that I want to find someone who looks at Esihle the way who looks at me the way Kosi is looking at Esihle right now in the monitor. I want to read before we continue. If we can take a response from Kosi, but I'll read one of my other favorite poems in the collection, and it's called "Dance with Me." What would it take for you to dance with me? High up, carefree, spectacular. What would it take for you to fly with me? Behind me, somewhere breathtaking. What would it take for you to stay with me? Close by, every day, intimate. And this poem resonates with me right now for various reasons. But I think one of the things that I've always loved about your poetry, and that you've certainly been open about in your interviews and public forums that you've spoken in, is this idea of normalizing joy, normalizing playfulness, normalizing the everydayness in the Black experience. I think there's so much expectation for our creative works to sort of mirror the Black condition, and the Black condition is often seen in very particular ways that's often linked to trauma and pain. But I've always loved, and I've probably shared, my favorite poems are poems like this, where there's also an element of play, an element of intimacy, an element of everydayness, right? And that everydayness not necessarily being spectacular, but in its everydayness being extraordinary and spectacular, if it makes sense. And so that really resonated with me, because I was just like, I wish my crush and I could be this poem. Why can't my crush dance with me? Anyways, do you have any sort of response before we go to the second reading, and then we'll open up to the floor for reflections?
Oh my goodness. My responses are just like, wow. Wow, wow. I just always enjoy listening to how people are touched or not by the poems. And it always just confirms for me the universal nature of the human experiences, you know? And when people often ask me, what did you mean when you wrote that poem? I always say to them, why are you asking? What does it mean for you? And I always find that even if the experiences, if the person shares the experience, even if the experiences are so oppositional, the way that the poem works allows for that kind of interpretation. So that's what I'm reminded of as I'm listening to people right now. But I'm quite curious about why people like the pain poem. Because all of you seem to have chosen it, right?
Do you have any responses, Esihle and Mawethu?
I mean, I really think it was both what Esihle and Gcobani, attempted to articulate earlier, which is there's kind of a universality into pain. I think particularly in a moment like this, where we are, in the midst of a pandemic, there's feelings of loneliness, there's different ways in which we are manufacturing joy, but part of that manufacturing is kind of acknowledging this present moment, right? And what it means to bury so many people in such unusual ways, what it means to be so lonely and acknowledge it, right? And publicly speak about what Brene Brown calls rumbling and vulnerability, right? And really, I think for me that poem, that poem sums up so many things so beautifully, and yeah.
Okay, I am just going to build a bit on what Mawethu said about how universal pain is. I think if there are two emotions that people relate to, it's pain and love. And right now in this moment, we are forced to sort of think of pain and love in very parallel ways. Because if you think about the thick of lockdown, there was the Black Lives Matter and NSARS, that sort of thing. People were in pain, yet they love their countries and themselves so much that they just like, we're going to ignore everything else. including social distancing, and take to the streets. So there is this element of pain, but also that pain runs in very similar ways with the thread of love. And that's my response to your question.
Thank you.
I love it. Do you have something to read before we go to the second round of readings, and then we'll open up to discussion that includes everyone in the room who has something to share or read or comment or ask and so on?
Are you asking me?
Yes. Before I get to Mawethu and
Okay. Yeah, I thought I might read the poem that is on the unnumbered page right at the start of the book. Tomorrow awaits our awakening. Tomorrow awaits our awakening. The reconstructed us, the self-conscious collective, the responsible and inspired us. Tomorrow will not abandon us. I hadn't planned to read that, but as I listened to the universality of pain that we're talking about, I'm thinking, well, on the other side of pain is not only love, there's hope.
Absolutely.
I totally agree.
Sure. Mawethu, you can go for your second reading.
Amazing. I will start this second reading going, I think, towards the beginning of the book. My first poem for this round comes from page 8, When Laughter Hurts. When laughter hurts, something breaks. Pieces fly in the air, cutting into anything and anyone on their corridors of flight, but somewhere, some bleed. When laughter hurts and some bleed, the smell of fresh blood nauseates. Though others bleed in solidarity, despite the choke, despite the vomit. When laughter hurts and others vomit, contamination spread, the atmosphere turns foul, and so in time we marinate in the affliction. So that's the first poem for this round. I wanted to read The Sky Agrees because I thought it is also such a beautiful poem. And also just this commentary is refreshing on the revolution. Kind of starting to think of modern technologies as revolutionary for the ways in which they are slowly, getting us into a certain space as the Black, community. And yeah, I really like that poem. The second poem I'm going to read is from page 21. It's called Home Address. She refuses to pack and leave. Every morning, she prays out loud twice while standing in front of the massive wooden door, kneeling for the third time in front of the eternal flame. She tells them the flame is her own fire, that she cooks her own meals, that she cooks her meals there, and sleeps there on cold nights, that she taught herself to read by standing in front of the lettered door. She tells them the colossal door is a superwoman. When they say she has lost her mind, she says that is a lie. Her home address is Hilltop, and her name is Dedani. Lost for words. I'm in a writing process, so I've been particularly working on some poetry submissions which I've submitted a while ago, and I think kind of going into this reading. And thank you so much, Tops, for this book. preparing for this reading and reading these poems has been so igniting. Pretty much what Esihle says at the start, which is there's been an absence of, literally black cultural productive, spaces, and kind of getting this book has been, I think, just an ignition of that. And the next poem I'm going to read is on page 35. It is called Chasing. When the sun sets, I watch you stare at clouds as they gather around it. You marvel at how it touches sides with wonder. As it dips behind the horizon, bows a silent welcome to the stars and the moon holding your pain in the dark, you continue to chase laughter. And it is, I think, in the theme of manufacturing joy, right? And what does it mean for people to understand themselves in multiplicity all the time? I am not just the pain. I am the pain, and I am also the joy. I am the happiness, and I am also, the bad, and maybe, I am the dark, and I am also the light, and I am, the in between. And I think I like that. I like that. The idea that you could be still in pain, but be envisioning a future, that is filled with joy. And this is the fourth poem I'm reading. It is on page 34. There's someone who's, I think, who hasn't muted, muted themselves. I can hear my echo, but that's okay now, it's gone. The poem is called To Be Young, Lesbian, and Black. I had of course issues with picking it up because I don't want it to seem like I'm appropriating a struggle, but I think we are allowed to read this poem. So for this context, I chose it because I also think it's so important. To be young, lesbian, and black. Imagine being white, male, and gay like the honorable judge. People would treat me with respect, even before I speak. They would invite me to meetings and listen to what I say, quote my words and share them in various medias, publish my biography, and the world would read it. Imagine being white, male, and gay like the honorable judge. I am young, lesbian, and black like my murdered sisters. I will never be white, male, and gay like the honorable judge who lives on the pedestal of public approval, his sexuality flaunted on his behalf, while I live in the underground of collective disapproval, my sexuality hidden on my behalf. And yeah, I mean, I as I've said, I do queer work, and I think it is interesting, even within the civic space work that we do at Civicus, that, so part of the two populations that always suffer in any crisis are women and children. I think it is also like within this queer experience, it is very easy for us to kind of forget, the position and the privilege that we hold, right? And I think this poem, for me is a reminder. I mean, it also hits home, because when you reference, the murdered lesbians, I grew up in Soweto, and I know, of a lot of stories, and I know a few people who are also like, murdered because of their sexual orientation. And so I particularly like the quirkiness of the poem, but also the seriousness of it at the same time. And the last poem I am going to read so many poems I've marked. It's a lot. Let's go back to this one. It is on page 26. It is titled Our Hill. Our hill. On top of this hill sits our conscience. Inside the belly of this hill rests our stories. Winds blow around this hill, keeping it in check and intact, carving a monument of our oneness. The eyes of the world scrutinize this hill. The feet of the world walk this hill. In the privacy of our individual selves, I believe we honor this, our hill. Thank you so much. And I like the aesthetic, and I like the aesthetic of this poem, and I also like the place you kind of take us through. I mean, you know, it's for me, right? It reminds me of the importance of yoga, you know, so a certain regard because of how it is positioned. But I mean, it is also just like the heel as a symbol in Black African culture. You know, and you know, as a symbol also in religion, and yeah, like I really liked that poem. Thank you so much.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Mawethu. Kosi, I accidentally muted you, so you're gonna have to unmute yourself.
Yep.
Okay, we can hear you now. Over to you.
So as I was sitting here, I'm just like, Mawethu always does this, because to be young, lesbian, and Black is again one of my choices this time around. So that's another disclaimer. I am going to start with a poem on page 71. It's titled In Your Silence. The world has taken my words, yet my story with you remains. So I recite it in silence, in punctuation marks, in my mind, alone, so I can keep it alive. Here's my story summarized. It begins with a few question marks, continues through obvious exclamation marks, a colon, followed by a comma after comma. Innumerable dizzy commas, so I breathe. Later a dash, ushering unreadable words. I know these world-renowned words, but now they are unreadable, unutterable. Another dash follows, in a river-like flow. Then a question mark returns, a bigger one, then a space, a yearning space, and finally, a bellowing exclamation mark, followed by a very full stop. So I picked this poem for various reasons, and one of those reasons here is how we never really figure it out. At some point, you're the full stop, then it's a comma. It's always this journey of just trying to figure something out. But I also like the idea that very often we think it takes third parties, it takes other people to keep our stories alive. That someone else must come and publish a book on you, Nkosi, but you just like, I can keep it alive. You aren't asking that, you are declaring it as something that you're able to do. But from the title of the poem, In Your Silence, I'm just thinking about how I think as a country we sort of have a difficulty with silence. I think that's a thing. And also trying to read silence as language in itself. And I am thinking of Ntabiseng Mutsime as the mute always speak, right? So that the silence as language in itself. And it also falls on the lines of who do we choose to remember, who is remembered collectively, nationally, that sort of thing, and who's silenced and for what reasons. That's why this is one of the poems that I chose. I'm going to move to my second one, which is on page 47. It's titled No, Never. No, she never thinks of you. When she goes to sleep at night, she never has a reason to. She never thinks of you, even when her fingers are on the Google search button. She never thinks of you when she hears your name being called. She does not turn around with curiosity to see who stares once a magical name. Your face does not replace the stranger's face. Not even when someone mentions your country. Does she locate you in your hometown with precision? She packs everything away. She does not remember where things are. She wouldn't find them if she looked. See, she never thinks of you beyond answering questions when friends ask. Then instantly, she wipes you out of her mind. No, never. She no longer thinks of you. So when I saw this poem, I was thinking of a Nina Simone quote where she is speaking about how, as women back then, they weren't thinking about boys and makeup, they were thinking about Marx and the revolution because that's real girl talk, right? And so that's what I was thinking of here, that there isn't always a third party being thought of. There isn't always an other being thought of until that person's name is raised. But but people's minds aren't just located in that thing. There's more to the world, more to life. There are varying experiences to just be fixated on this one thing or person or location or even country. Also, I'm not sure if you guys realized I've been reading from the back going to the front for a very specific reason, and I'll tell you after I read my second last one rather. This one is page 34 that Mawethu borrowed from me. I can say that. It's titled "To be Young, Lesbian, and Black." Imagine being white, male, and gay like the honorable judge. People would treat me with respect even before I ask. They would invite me to meetings and listen to what I have to say, quote my words and share them in various media, publish my biography and the world would read it. Imagine being white, male, and gay like the honorable judge. I am young, lesbian, and black like my murdered sisters. I'll never be white, male, and gay like the honorable judge, who lives on the pedestal of public approval, his sexuality flaunted on his behalf, while I live in the underground collective disapproval, my sexuality hidden on my behalf. So the reason that I chose this poem is I am aware of some of the ways that we as gay men take up space and how we sort of benefit from that act of taking up space and pushing certain people to the margins, even within our own community. But I don't think that white gay men are always very aware of the ways that they benefit just by being men and being white and being gay in the community, that there are these multiple benefits that come with all these three identities. And at the same time, because of these benefits, they don't have to imagine or even write the way that Mamkos has written about murdered lesbian sisters. That's not in their realities. It's something that they might meet in literature, but the chances of them living through that are moved from slim to non-existent, really. And it also then forces us to think about, I'm torn between saying the myth of safety or little safety for Black lesbian women. I'm not sure which one would be the most appropriate one. And what that then means to live in a country that says it's democratic, and what that means for Black lesbian citizenship in the country in general, when safety is nothing but a myth. Of course, one person can disagree with that because I am not like a lesbian woman, so I don't know that. And so the reason I've sort of read it from the back moving to the front and chosen these two poems to follow each other. So the last one will be on page 24, Forget About Apartheid. And I choose these two because, again, this myth of safety and how radically has the lives of Black lesbians changed in the country if there hasn't been much safety in post-apartheid South Africa as there were in pre-democratic South Africa. And I sort of wonder what that means for Black lesbian lives in the country, and if their lives in terms of safety has really changed in large amounts, really. Page 24, Forget About Apartheid. Tell that to the young people shouting, bring back the land. They carry intergenerational stories of mass removals. Under their skins, where memories crawl like worms, lingering. Tell that to the woman whose son was last seen 30 years ago, inside a Nyala van driven by a white man in a SADF uniform. This woman who attends all exhumations she's ever heard about, hoping. Tell that to the 3 sisters whose parents died in exile before they returned to fetch them. All 3 vowed never to have their own children, in case they too never know their parents' loving. Tell that to the 60-year-old woman raped and tortured in prison, whose scars from torture rods of metal never leave her thighs, who disallowed herself the freedom of nudity even after the TRC and its forgivings. Tell that to the octogenarian on a wheelchair, once a young lion, when the voices of his grandchildren ring in his head. But Grandpa, you never want to tell us who took your legs away. Grandpa, where can I get my own wheelchair? I want to be like you. Why don't you have legs, Grandpa? Mama said I must ask you. Grandpa, don't you have a speedometer in your wheelchair? I can go looking for your legs, Grandpa. I'm good at finding things. Forget about apartheid. And as heavy as that poem is, I choose it because one of the reasons, as young as I am, I'm in spaces with my peers a lot. And there's this idea that apartheid is like an ancient idea that happened hundreds of years ago. But the reality is the people who experienced it are still alive. They're still living with those memories. It's really a few decades away. So the people who experience these things, who live through the losses and the sufferings, are people that are still here. And their grandchildren get to ask questions that might make them feel uncomfortable. They might have to live in their societies where they are really triggered every day because they don't have things like legs. They might have lost those things in bushes or during police raids. And there is that idea that just forget about it. But forgetting about things doesn't really change a lot. I'm also reminded of a quote by Mamti Usofiklina, where she writes about how when there was mass removals, her own mother lost weight, and there was so much heartbreak and just being taken away from that. And so the people who lived through it have this ongoing heartbreak that's part of the reality because they've lost so much, but they've regained so little. And I'm obviously fascinated by the TRC. Part of my master's was focusing on that. And one of the person that I interviewed told me that they feel that the TRC wasn't very successful because there weren't material benefits for the people who lost their legs and lived through apartheid, but the people who benefited through it had really had benefits like that they could touch and measure those sort of benefits, but that wasn't the case in terms of reparations and that sort of thing. And that is why I have chosen that last poem. Thank you.
Oof, thank you so much. Okay, Kosi, you are muted. I don't know if you have any responses, and then we're gonna go into open forum where basically anyone in the room can ask a question, share a reading. Yes, anything goes. Kosi?
Yeah. Well, thank you again. The Forget About Apartheid poem. It's interesting what you're saying, because I remember about 3-4 years ago being in a room. We were reading poetry somewhere at Wits, and then somebody raised their hand and said, we young people really need to learn more about this apartheid because we don't know what happened. And I just remember standing there and thinking, you don't know what happened. You don't know what happened. What do you mean you don't know what happened? So I now have quite a number of stories from young people who talk about how their parents don't want to talk about apartheid. And so, I mean, I continue to make the connections. And I'm reminded as well of a story when my daughter was very, very young. I think she hadn't even started school. And then one day she said to me, "Mom, can you please tell me those stories of long, long ago?" I said, "What do you mean, the stories of long, long ago?" She says, "No, there's a story that I remember you telling me about not sitting on a bench and how white people sat on some benches and black people said, that doesn't make sense to me, Mom." I said, "What part of it?" So we had this long conversation and I was explaining how we had to make certain choices, because you could choose to sit on a white people's bench and be killed and that's the end of the story. Or you could choose not to sit on that bench because you have other things that you're doing that you consider to be more serious activism, rather than just sitting on a white people's bench at a train station and they're going to kill you and that's the end of it. So I suppose I'm saying, well, it's interesting that you are working with that poem like that, because sometimes I don't have the answer to that question. Our parents don't want to tell us about apartheid because a part of me wants to say, well, go read about it. The stories everywhere. But a part of me also understands that there's a level at which so much has changed that it's actually very hard to imagine what would have come before. And even when you hear certain stories, some of them don't make sense because the context, even though you know it in your head because you've read, was not lived for you. So it's hard to make sense of some of the things that might, because for my daughter, for instance, I mean, she was very, very young when she asked the question. She said, "But Mom, I know you. You'd sit wherever you want." And that's the mother she knows. So how could I have chosen not to sit just because somebody says I shouldn't? The mother she knew, she knows, well, she knew then, she continues to know, would just do what she wants. So sometimes I just feel like we all have to do what we feel the need to do, what matters to us, what's important to us. Because even small little things like the difference between Cape Town and Johannesburg, how being Black in Joburg is very different to being Black in Cape Town. And so when your daughter goes to Cape Town and she feels that being Black, she said something that was very interesting. For instance, she said, "Well, I'm loving the university, but I don't like being in Cape Town, in the spaces in Cape Town, in, you know, the public spaces." So I remember, I can never forget what it feels like to be Black in Cape Town, because even under democracy, it still feels like the Black apartheid of my growing up days. So, I mean, I'm not trying to give answers. I'm just saying that this poem for me was about trying to come up with the details of some of the stories, because you can't tell all the stories. And so some of the stories are of people that I know, and some of the stories are of people that I don't know. And some of the stories are imagined, but they are based on the realities that we grew up with. And so the poem might resonate with some people, it might not resonate with others, but I suppose I keep realizing the importance of telling stories. And I'm glad that I'm in that stage of my life where I've just committed to telling stories.
Yes. Okay, let's open up. Are there any questions? So one of my students, he was in the room, but I think he's having network troubles, and I know for sure he has a copy of the book, and he texted me at 5 a.m. this morning for the link, and I'm hopefully we can get him back, Siyabonga, because he seemed to have quite a lot to ask. But for the people, it's open now. So if you have a question, please either raise your hand or, I mean, there aren't so many of us, so people can literally just unmute themselves and go. And that includes you and Esihle and Mawethu, if you have any specific questions as
I was about to say, can I open the floor?
Yes, you can. When you have a master's with distinction, yes, you can.
Thank you. So, Mamkos, my question here is, you were speaking about how you are happy to be in the business of storytelling, if I can call it that, and how some of the stories are imagined, some of the people that you know, and some you've lived with them. And I sort of wonder about the ethics of storytelling. How much can we tell, especially when it's other people's stories, without touching on grounds that are too sensitive for them? How do we make that kind of decision?
Well, you've both of you have read the poem that you might be referring to. After I wrote that poem, that poem was, I love Nina. Well, I know that other people have sung that song, but I love Nina Simone's version, "To be young, gifted and black." So one day I was just sitting and trying to do other work, and then this this poem came in my head, "To be young, lesbian and black," and then I just, some of the poems come like that for me. And as we were preparing, when I'd worked with the editor and we're getting ready to go to print, I thought, oh my gosh, I know Edwin. I must show him the poem, because you can't be South African and not know who the honorable judge is that I'm referring to. So I emailed him. I said, Edwin, I'm working on a manuscript. It's due out, whatever. I think we already had a production schedule at the time. And I said, knowing what I know of you, I trust that you understand why I needed to write a poem like this. What I didn't want is for you to be surprised when you either see it yourself in the book or somebody else tells you that there's a poem about you. And he wrote back, I think I've still kept the email. So I will paraphrase, I don't remember the exact words. He said something like, wow, thank you, this is a very beautiful poem. Of course I understand, I know why it's important. And yeah, I mean, thank you for sharing it. And then he put it on his signature in the email. I don't know for how long, because we're not the kinds of friends who are emailing frequently, but when he was responding to me, he had put it there. And the reason I did that, as I was saying earlier, is because I know him, you know, but if you're writing about, I don't know, if you're writing about somebody that you don't know, and it's quite important to actually mention their name or mention it in, if you're not mentioning the name, do it in ways that are very obvious. I think, yes, you have to think about what that means for you. And I think each one of us have to work through that process for yourselves to say, what does this mean? When I write a poem about, there's a poem called 10 Years Later about how the women did what they did, honoring Fezeka. I don't necessarily feel the need to say, here's a poem. I mean, she's no longer with us now, but assuming she was still alive, I don't feel the need to say, you know, here's a poem that I wrote about you, what do you think? Because the particular message in that poem is about one that welcomes what was happening, which was about honoring her. So I think it depends on the circumstances, because let me use the word, the tricky part about Edwin was that even if I hadn't known him personally, the idea of bringing race, gender, sexual orientation into one poem could, for other people, make them quite angry, upset, and saying, why are you bringing race into this poem, you know? I happen to be a judge, and so I can do whatever I like, whatever. Of course, Edwin wouldn't say that. But I suppose what I'm trying to say is that it really depends. And for each one of us writers, I think we work with the ethics that works for us. I don't know if there is a constitution on ethics and what it means to write about people that is somewhere that I've never read. So yeah, but also some of the imagined stories that I write about have been very surprising to me, because I'll write about something and then somebody comes and tells me that's my story. And I think, but I wasn't writing about, I don't know you, you know, I was just writing about an idea of what this means. And they say, but that's exactly what happened to me. So again, we go back to this universality thing. And if your stories, your poems are based on the broad lived experience, it's possible to imagine something that has already happened. And so you just write about it. And if somebody comes and claims it, it's like, oh yeah, okay, well, these are our stories. I mean, that's one thing that was really emphasized when I was doing the creative writing course, because they were saying, look, people have been writing for a very long time. There isn't a story that hasn't been told. The only difference is how do you tell it differently in a way that's unique to you. There isn't a story that hasn't been told in broad strokes. So how do you tell it in your minute, detailed, engaged strokes that speak to your tone, that speak to your style, that speak to what you care about?
Thank you. Any other questions from the floor? Feel free to raise your hand or to just mute. Okay, Mawethu, I see you're unmuted. And then we'll go to welcome. I see your hand.
I think it's pretty much related to Esihle's question. I think a lot around what does it mean to be a writer and to be burdened with activism, right? So like to be burdened with activism in the process of words making, right, or writing, right? And particularly because I think of the context that we stay in now, right, or that we live in, globally, where almost everything is the elephant in the room, right? And we kind of need to be we had to be woke, and that was important. But the wokeness has been stretched so much now that even in storytelling, there's kind of question on accountability. And I wanted to find out from you, Ma'am, because do you sometimes feel like you constantly have to make activist text, or yeah? So I mean, of course, I understand that the personal is very political, and so subsequently our stories in themselves do become activist text in one way or the other. But like, what I guess I'm asking is that your how much do you think of justice and accountability when you're writing nonfiction, or when you're writing poems which are not nonfiction, which are very much real? Yeah, I'm interested in that. Is that even a question for you?
Thank you. I think, Kosi, do you mind taking another question, or do you want to take one at a time?
No, I can take another one.
Okay. Welcome. Please feel free to unmute yourself and ask. Welcome. Please unmute yourself. Welcome. I think you're muted. Okay, Kosi, I think you can address the question so long, and then I'll try to, in the meantime, help Welcome with the tech.
So the question is, how much is activism and the idea of justice front and center when I write? Is that a proper paraphrasing of it? Because my life has been, I started being active in an activisty way, rather than just reading and watching and following the news. In my early 20s. So I've lived with it for a very long time. And so it's a part of who I am. It's hard to think about who I am without taking on the fact that I have been an activist for most of my life in different spheres of activism that were chosen. I made very clear decisions at various levels what I'm doing. So even now, I write because I love writing. I write because it's important to write. I write because it's important to tell our stories. They become an archive. There's so many reasons I write, but I also see that as activism. Suppose because that's who I am in my head. So I now see that if I must choose between being out in the streets because there's a demonstration and sitting down and writing a poem that's about that demonstration, I will sit down and write a poem about that demonstration, because that is currently the kind of activism that I have chosen. So that's the broad context. But in terms of the specific question, I think it's very close to what we were talking about earlier from Esihle's question about, so how do I work with the ethics? And I think a lot of it really is specific to whatever is being written at that time. Because of course, you need to do, for the things that go in your name are also about your reputation. So you want to do the best that you can each time, right? Because your name is on that. And I think it really depends on very specific issues. In the poem about the alkalinity of bottled water, I mentioned Shahira Khan, for instance, because I heard it on the news. I don't know her, I've never met her, but I heard it on the news repeatedly. And sadly, I'm the kind of person, sometimes the news will just make me cry, but I don't stop listening because I want to know what's happening. So I remember when I heard that story that I cried on that day about somebody I don't know, about somebody I haven't met. Now, do I write it like that and say I cried like you know, do I tell that story, or do I just mention what's already in the public news and therefore everybody just relates with it? If you happen not to listen to the news, you Google and then you'll know. So what's the point of doing that in that poem? It's to make the point about what it meant to be a student in a time like that. Did I look for her to find her to say, listen, I've mentioned you here? No, because for me, she was already in the news. She was being written about. She was being talked about everywhere, which is a very different thing to the Edwin Cameron thing that I was talking about. So I think the answer really lies with each thing that you're writing about and doing the best that you should, not to be ethical when you do it.
Thank you so much, Kosi. I see you've typed your comment, but you want to try unmute yourself and to express it one more time. Let me make you moderator and see if that changes your opportunity. Can you try unmuting yourself now? Because you are the moderator now, so you should have the same powers as me. Okay, Shandu, can you go? I saw your hand as well. If you can unmute yourself whilst I'm trying to sort out the welcomes tag.
Oh, no, I'd already written my question, but because I don't like the sound of my voice. Thank you so much for this. I love your book. I just have a question. I loved Gcobani's comment earlier when he said basically, I just want to know what does writing about Black joy mean to you? Because I just love the fact that you write freely about Black joy.
So much, Shandu. I think Welcome is still having trouble. So I wanted to add as well, my question was also going to be around, I think you use so much sensuality in your writing. There's so much that's, I think, almost intentionally understated. So one of my favorite, I won't read it now, but Touch is my favorite, one of my favorite poems in the collection. And it's really just you at a bookshop observing an intimate interaction between these two boys that you predict are going to be, naked together later on in the day. But, there's so much sort of, especially when people write about these kinds of things, almost intentional, not intentional, sorry, but almost an over-sexualization. But I think you use so much intimacy and sensuality in your work that in some ways, by not telling us a lot, we gain so much. I hope that makes sense. And I think that links to what Shandu is also asking around, the centrality of the everydayness in your work. You're almost like an anthropologist in a way, because well, that's what we work with. Yes, honorary anthropologist.
Well.
We work with observations and, sitting somewhere, making observations and telling a story based on that. So I also wanted just to linking to Shandu's question about the centrality of my work, but also the centrality for me around intimacy and sensuality rather than over-sexualization.
Okay. So the Black joy question is an interesting one because I don't sit down and say, yeah, I need a poem about Black joy. When I hear that response from people, I welcome it because it speaks to them in that particular way. My starting point is playfulness, is curiosity, it's trying things out about, you use the word, the everydayness. I believe that the everydayness of our lives teaches us a lot more than the big moments. So I like writing from a perspective of the everyday. I like writing from the perspective of detail. I like trying to play around with things rather than following format and being serious, because I've been pleasantly surprised by the product when the starting point was playing. So that's my starting point with the starting point is the craft rather than I want to write about Black joy. I want to write about ordinary things. And I want to write in a playful way. And I want to write in a detailed way. I think it also helps that I also trained as a journalist and worked as one for a very short while. And the significance of observation, I think I solidified it at that time. Just being able to look and watch with a view, with the knowing that you're going to have to describe this. So that part of it is ingrained in me. I do it with a lot of ease, and I do enjoy watching people just for fun, not because I'm a journalist. I've always just enjoyed watching things and people and movements. And then when I then studied journalism, I started watching the things, the people and the movements with a view to writing about them and describing them in detail. So part of my fascination is, ooh, how would I describe that? You know? So some of my starting points are things like those, but how would I describe that? And because I'm trying to bring the reader into my space, then it's like, then I really need to go there and go there and go there. And I think the idea of then moving to your point, Gcobani, about sensuality as opposed to hypersexualization and objectification comes from being a woman and being written about like that. It's beginning to feel to me like men don't know how else to look at women without over-sexualizing them, objectifying them. So I've read those kinds of writings all my life, and my response to them is no, no. So that's why I'm more sensual rather than over-sexualizing and turning people into objects. And I think, yeah, that comes from my rejection of reading about women who are written about like that. And also, it's very hard to write like that and it stays beautiful. So when you're objectifying and over-sexualizing, for me, it turns from being what I consider to be beautiful writing. I'm always striving to write beautifully. I'm striving to write simply, where the profundity comes from the simplicity. So yeah, over-sexualization doesn't do that for me, because it just throws the writing out of the window and it's bad. It becomes bad instantly.
Thank you so much. Oh, welcome. One last try. Do you want to try unmute yourself? Okay. Welcome typed his comment. So we forgot to mention actually at the beginning of the session, which is as of yesterday, Kosi won an award for Our Words, Our Worlds, which we actually launched at UJ. I can't believe it's 2 years ago now, right? Oh, well.
It was the 19th of February.
Yes, just over a year ago.
2020.
Yes. So Kosi won in the best nonfiction edited volume for the NIHSS Awards. And she won for the book on writings on Black women's writings on Black South African women's poets. So congratulations for that. Welcome started his comment by saying congratulations on your award for winning for writing on Black South African women poets. I really admire your dedication to writing. The diligence is evidence in the prose. What advice do you have to give on writers setting up a rigorous culture of writing consistently? And what aspect of your writing routine can you share with us? Thank you for your fabulous work. Just before you answer that, I'm going to just give a heads up to Esihle and Mawethu to just prepare your last readings, and then Kosi can just respond to welcome, and then we can begin the process of closing this beautiful session. So over to you, Kosi.
Yeah, well, firstly, thank you. The excitement from last night is still everywhere in my body. So it's everywhere in my body because I worked on that project for a very years, to be precise, 6 years and 6 weeks. But also it's the thing I was talking about earlier, the activism, the struggle, the whatever, the fact that the politics of who we are as Black people and how we are viewed as Black people, and in particular as Black women, it doesn't matter what sphere of life you're in, you're still a Black woman. And somebody, one of the judges for this category, came to me and said, oh my gosh, I didn't know this happens even in poetry. And it was a Black male, and the comment was about the stories that he was reading from the book. And I said, so what made you think that poetry might be different and women would be seen differently there? And he was kind of like stuck because he hadn't really thought about it. So all this to say, the reason I'm still excited is because the judges could see what the book was doing, merging activism, struggle with scholarship and deep research and history and going across disciplines to create the kind of book that Our Words, Our Worlds is. And when they were talking about it, it was clear that there was overwhelming agreement about how the book, how significant the book is for South Africa and literature at this point in time. So thank you for that. I'm very, very excited. What can I share? This is going to sound very boring. Read, 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 read. I actually don't think I would be so passionate about writing if I hadn't read like I have read my whole life. Because some of the lessons, if reading is part of your life, come to you in a very subconscious way, in a very, I think if you read consciously, it will impact on your writing. And you will know enough about what's in the world to come up with writing that is speaking to what's needed in the world. My writing routine, I wish I could say I have a routine that is like standard. I sit down, I put water, I put this here, as some people do. It depends on where I'm at. When I am revising a text that's been written, I am rigorous about making sure that I revise over and over and over and over, and each round of revision is focused on something. For instance, there'll be a round that's focused on how many words are used too many times, even when they don't make sense in the 5th time they're being used, you know, so how do I change that? The next round becomes, are the sentences connecting properly? Am I creating what I want to create, whether it's tension or this or that? So I'm very disciplined when I'm revising because I always feel like my brain has to be super sharp to remember where I'm at with each draft. So when I'm doing that, I set out some routine. I do not revise from home often because my home is lovely. It's a place of fun, and, you know, I don't feel like working too hard when I'm at home. So I make myself, I take myself out of a relaxed space so I can really focus. So that's the routine for revision. Some of the things that scream out to be written about, some of them I just ignore them, and if they keep coming, then I say, oh, please, hey, just leave me alone, and I sit down and I write. And then it depends on what comes out as I write. Sometimes it will be like, oh, okay, that was a serious poem, like the Alkalinity of Bottled Water. It came out like that. I was doing something else, and then it insisted on coming, and then I wrote it and I finished it. And then I didn't come back to it until it was time to revise the manuscript. But other things come, and after some time, it's like, oh, that was nonsense, and I throw it out. So I don't have, because I don't have the luxury of being a full-time paid writer, it has not been possible, I think, to create a routine. But when I know that I'm working towards a very specific manuscript, then I try to monitor myself. I have found that the hours of 3 to 7, 8 in the morning are the best hours for me. So if I know, for instance, that there's a story that's been in my head and it's sounding complicated, so I can't just write it, but it's not leaving my head, then I'll be deliberate about getting up in the morning because I know that my brain works much better in the morning. Then I'll say, come, let's engage. So it depends, really. I don't have what I would call my writing routine. I just have ways of dealing with different things at different times. I think the day I am a fully paid writer, and that's all I do every day, I might develop some routine. We shall see.
We shall see. Not just see, we shall make it happen. Okay, Esihle and okay, let's start with Esihle because I'm always putting Mawethu first. So Esihle, you can close us off with your final thoughts and the reading if you want. And then we'll go to Mawethu and then Kosi, and then we close the session.
Thank you so much, Doc. Mom Kosi, thank you. I've loved the space. I'm just like, and we need to be in person soon, I hope. I am going to end off with 2 readings, one on page 15 and one on page 35. I will start with the one on page 15, titled Tentacles. The tentacles of white men in academia go deep, spread wide, and tangle, cross time, says a Black woman scholar. The only solution is to wait and wait for them to die. Then I chose that poem because I just left university for a short while, and I know the ways in which I'm familiar. I don't know them. I'm familiar with some of the ways in which academia silences Black women, Black queer people. And it's just a thing as if Black queer work is not intellectual enough to be taught. And so it just waits. And as it was written here, for Black women to die until we sort of start taking them seriously. Then I will end off with a bit lighter one on page 35, titled Chasing. I've been selecting the heavy poems. When the sun sets, I watch you stare at clouds as they gather around it. You marvel at how it touches side with wonder as it dips behind the horizon, bows a silent welcome to the stars and the moon, holding your pain in the dark. You continue to chase laughter. And I chose this one because I enjoyed how it played with various parts of nature to bring together this poem, but also how we're able to just marvel at life and the beauty of nature, even though the pain is there, but you choose to just pay attention to the joys of being alive when they present themselves. And I just want to really thank you for this book. And thank you, Doc, for organizing this. It means the world to me. Thank you so much.
Esihle. Esihle. Why did I say Esihle? Esihle.
Thank you. Thank you. Mawethu?
Thank you so much, Esihle, for being a great reading mate. I am reading my last round of poems, and yeah, I mean it's been really it's been such an amazing text to engage with. Ask me where do I get the time, even 2 hours on a Thursday to sit and just read poetry. I will tell you I don't know, but you know, I've done it because this text particularly spoke to me in such surreal ways. Thank you so much, Doc. You know, for buying the book for me and for inviting me subsequently to the session. I really, really appreciate it. My first poem for this round is called My Jazz. It's on page 41. This is jazz. Simple, yet mystical. It's the jazz of my childhood, the razzmatazz of wonder. It's the candescence of youth, the gentle melting into adulthood. This is the jazz of womanhood, deep and mellow against the wall of certainty. This is the jazz of middle age, always piercing together like a quilt, colors, shapes, positions, melting points. This is my jazz. I don't know, what can I say? Of course, like the use of jazz as a symbol, because I do think jazz is complicated enough, you know, and jazz is dense enough, you know, to allow multiple meanings. And I think this poem again, in the true Nkosi Xaba style, is dense enough, you know, and simple enough, but yet so smooth and sensual, and at the same time deep, you know, and youthful. So I really liked, you know, I like reading your poems, particularly for this, that as I read, there's so many emotions, you know, that erupt. I mean, I like the theatrics, and those poems also allow me for that moment, because it's almost like, because each word has been chosen so intentionally, it's easy, you know, to I think read back the intentionality subsequently. The second poem I've chosen to read is on page 56. I think it's such a special poem. It is called My Name is Gentle Fingers. When we woke up that morning, everyone had an errand to run. It was the day of my sister's 50th birthday party. But I, with Mama almost alone in the house, hoped she would focus on me, that she would call me by name. I kept calling her, Mama, Mama, wishing, hoping, dreaming she might call me by name at least once. I walked to the bathroom, watched her while she asked for directions on what to do next. Back in the bedroom, I used my body cream on her dry and creased skin. Then she looked me in the eye and smiled. Without calling me by name, she said, yours are gentle fingers. Ah, you know, it's an interesting one. I've had an interesting relationship with my mother too, and sometimes I wonder what would have happened to kind of my choices and subsequently who I am in the world if my mother had lived until this moment. And you know, it's interesting, you know, because I mean we never really speak about, um, we never meant to speak about the ill relationships that sometimes, you know, exist between children and mothers, but like also like, you know, the idea that sometimes distance build years of unfamiliarity, and that sometimes, you know, certain choices, are always fears for our mothers, right? So some choices we'll ever make will be fears for our mothers, and you know, really navigating that. I think it's multi-layered, this poem, for me, because again, like I there's so many things I long, but at the same time, you know, there's so many things I know, about wanting to be seen in very particular ways, and yeah, like, yeah, it's a very dense, but so beautiful poem, because of the ways in which it's written. And then my second last poem, because I like reading this book, as a result, I have chosen more poems. It is on page 10, and it is titled "This Four Words." It is time to go to bed, so I must summon stillness, silence the voices, erase the visuals, concentrate. But first, I will compete. I will complete my evening routine. Turn off the geyser, boil water and soak slices of limes and lemon, brush my teeth, read messages and respond to deserving ones, set the alarm for 4:30, pack the yoga bag and place it next to the back door, lock all doors, turn on the wall light facing the street, double check the two main doors are locked. And all while these words, bright red repeating, distracting like thunder, promising like stars shining through the dark night sky, these forwards leave in my head. Pay back the money. And again, you know, it's such a it's such a beautiful poem about sometimes what stands out, you know, and yeah, we'll leave it there. And then my last poem, for tonight, is my last poem for tonight is on page 23. I thought I like this poem particularly for the style. It's called the 2016 Coffin. It's also quite a very heavy, it's a very heavy poem, but I like the approach, and I like what you give us, and subsequently also what you leave in the ways in which you present this particular narrative. The 2016 Coffin. Inside the coffin, a black man. Outside the coffin, two white men, two flying dreads, petrol and a snake. On the witness stand, two white men. Outside the court, people united in protest, the memory of this coffin alive in our muscles. And yeah, I think it's an interesting poem to close off with, particularly, you know, because of the reminders, you know, of the reality of race and you know, Black subjectivity, you know, in South Africa. But for me, it was really also how and what you gave. There's so much that unravels. I think it is such a short poem, but it is probably one of your longest poems in this book.
Thank you, Mawethu. Thank you very much.
Thank you, thank you. I think the comments, someone saying congratulations, of course, about the award. Thank you so much for that. Woohoo, congratulations. Welcome has mad love for you. I think that just sums up a lot of what you've given us today. So without any further ado, you can close us off, Khosi, with your final sort of reflections, and then we will close the session.
Final reflections. I don't think. There has never been a session on my poetry where there has been a reading of so many poems with such passion, with such engagement. I am blown away. So I just want to say thank you, Gcobani. Thank you, Esihle. Thank you, Mawethu. It's just, wow. Really, this is quite special. When we launched this book, for instance, at the Wits Writing Center, yes, there was reading and there was a lot of conversation, because that's the way the launch, that's the format that the launch took. And I also did a home launch, which is something I like to do, invite people and they come. And on that particular day, I chose to allocate people some poems. And they read them because I needed to hear them for the first time as poems in the book, because until then, I had been reading them aloud with the finalizing, the revising, and all of that. So there were quite a number of people. I don't remember how many they were, but I had decided so-and-so is going to read this poem. So it was an experiment from my part, a playful experiment. Some people were upset with the poems I gave them. Others were so happy with the poems I gave them. So I was trying something out. But I've never had people just choose poems and talk to them. So this was special for that reason. So Gcobani sent me the program and I said, we've never done this before. I'm happy to try something new. So it felt really special. I loved the engagement you had with the poems, including you, Gcobani, the ones you chose. I can only say thank you, thank you, thank you. So I thought I would end with a poem that I allocated to somebody who then said to me, why did you give me that poem? Why? It's on page 18. It's called The Storytelling Jug. I am the 2-liter jug, plastic and royal blue. I was brought to this home as a gift 5 years ago. The firstborn daughter of the mother of this home used her first salary to buy her mother a special gift. Mama, you need a decent, dedicated kitchen jug, she said. The daughter, Sozesazi, had a smile of pride when she presented me. Until then, I had been living for years at Vukani General Dealers. No one wanted me. I had learned to love the smell of dust. I learned to listen to voices of shoppers and relished their touch. What do you think of this one? Too blue, maybe? They said. Then, one day, when the mother and father of this home were sleeping in their bedroom, a boy I had never seen stormed into the kitchen, filled me up with tap water, walked down the corridor into the main bedroom. Here, wash it with this, and handed me to another boy. This boy was naked on top of the mother of the home. With a speed, he shifted, emptied me of the water down the legs of the mother of this home, then threw me on the floor where the father of the home was kneeling. Help me, please, his eyes and face were saying. Large brown tape covered his mouth. His hands were tied behind him. He rocked from side to side. I thought it was his way of comforting himself. Then I counted 5 boys in the bedroom. One was emptying the drawers. It's your turn. Go fill up the jug, he screamed, pointing at another. I was back in the kitchen in the hands of another boy who did what the other boy had done but didn't close the tap. Back in the bedroom, I was aware of the dripping water. I knew that the mother of this home would hate that. One boy got off her. You took all the juices. She's dry. He sounded angry. They must have rehearsed this going to the kitchen part, the climbing on the bed, moving up and down the mother, the moaning each climber emitted before getting off the bed. I had seen many things in this home and at the general dealer. Hurry up, merchants. It's getting dark outside, one of them said. And so, finally, they had to stop taking turns with the mother of the home. When they left, they were running, all 5 of them. The mother of the home removed the tape from her mouth and started crying so loud I thought the ceiling would crack. Very slowly, she moved and climbed down. I'm coming, Baba. Let me get a pair of scissors. All this time, she was crying. The mother and the father of this house left on that day. I decided I would become the storytelling jug from then on. Always, I start with the words. I am the 2-liter jug, plastic and royal blue. I came to this home a gift of a daughter to her mother many years ago. Then I tell the story in a manner that matches my mood on the day. On some days, I focus on the silences between sounds that fills this house. On other days, I give life to their words because I remember them all. On most days, I tell the story just the way it unfolded on that yesterday-like day. I was once a dedicated kitchen jug. I evolved into a storytelling jug, decent, 2 liters in volume, plastic and royal blue.
Sure. Thank you. Thank you.